Let's bring it Dr. Tina Kerr, rather. So when I lived in Wilmington, North Carolina, or was it Charleston, they had Kerr, K-E-R-R, but it was pronounced Kerr.
Oh, interesting.
It's like us with Shaner.
Yeah.
You know, so you always know who's not a local and this, that, and the other.
Right.
So
Okay.
every time I see that, it's just automatic.
Okay.
Anyway, so it was great to bring in the doctor. She is with the Michigan Association of Superintendents and Administrators. Great to have you with us again.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're a few months now into this job. It's like an old hat, right?
I'll hit my 1-year mark July 1st.
Wow, what a year it's been for you.
Yes, absolutely. For everyone, for sure.
So with that, as we, start to what we hope to be the end of the pandemic, we're loosening so many of the restrictions starting next week, earlier than anticipated. However, still looking for guidance on what this is going to mean for the schools. Can you give us a little insight on what is going on behind the scenes and how you and the superintendents are still trying to navigate this world?
Well, I think you probably heard a huge sigh of relief across the state as schools finally started to come to an end for this school year. It has been a tremendously challenging year for educators across the state. But unfortunately, that sigh of relief is short-lived, because as we ramp up into summer and start to think about next fall, all the planning has already been starting in March, has to continue and move forward. The unknown is still there. I mean, the virus isn't gone, and now we have variants that are concerning for our districts. We know that there's going to be some more guidance coming out in regards to schools for reopening in the fall as far as face masks, how we're going to continue to see the vaccinations proceed. But there's still a lot of unknown factors there. So schools are just trying to be as creative and as supportive of their families and communities and students to ensure that we have a great start next fall.
For the most part, is the thought, though, when it comes fall, it's going to be back to normal?
Our normal changed.
Schools may never get back to the way they used to be.
Schools will never be back to the way they were. I can tell you a majority of districts are having conversations because some students have been extremely successful online, and I think schools are going to find themselves having to set schedules that may have 2 or 3 different schedules, a hybrid, an in-person, or strictly online. And that is a lot of work and can be very challenging for districts, especially when you think about the number of staff and how we have to cover those offerings with the districts. But I will tell you this, all of our district leaders have really focused on, we can't go back the way we did education before. So even though it may not be students walk in the building September 1st, it's just like, this is how it is, it's the way it always was, those days are gone. Our superintendents are going to continue, and district leaders will continue to try and transform education in light of what just happened in this pandemic.
Well, some people will argue that, the education scene needed a shakeup because, we were so used to this is the way it's done. And it's hard sometimes to change the way things were done. So could this actually maybe be some good silver linings coming out of this?
We've said that all along. I don't think any educator in the state would ever say that the system was perfect. We did have students that needed more supports. We needed a change and shift in our funding structures. We needed to move into this new technology era. And the pandemic forced us to do some things, but it also showed us that we're a resilient profession and we can change with the needs of our society and our students, because the jobs that we used to train for 100 years ago, we're trying now to train for the jobs in the next 50 because they're completely different. That industrial era is no longer what we're training for. So the system had to change for sure.
So with that, Dr. Tina Kerr with us here on the MegaCast. She's the executive director for the Michigan Association of Superintendents and Administrators. And so, Doctor, if I can ask you as well, you mentioned budgets, the word funding. How is that going to change? And is it improved, do you anticipate?
Well, obviously, there's been a one-time, I say that, one-time infusion of funds. That doesn't fix our funding problems in Michigan. You know, this SFRC report is something that we fully support as an association, as well as the work you may have heard from with Launch Michigan. We have to have an adequate, equitable, and sustainable funding structure moving forward for students. Not every child costs the same to educate. And the other issue is this pandemic showed us how we knew we had equity gaps, but they were exacerbated through this pandemic. And so I feel we are in crisis right now to really truly change the funding structure of Michigan schools, because our students deserve that and have to have that in place so that we can continue to improve the services that are provided to them and help educate every child where they're at and where they're coming from.
Well, I think, coming out of this pandemic, one thing, so many parents have a much larger appreciation for our educators and all of the work that, the teachers and everyone on the front lines of the education system in the state of Michigan, you're newly appreciated. But when we're talking about funding, how would you like to see it change?
I don't think we have time for this whole interview to tell you all of how I'd like it changed. The big thing is if you haven't, the SFRC report is very thorough and talks about how we have to, number one, cost of living, inflation. Typically, we have not covered for that. The biggest issue for me is the special needs, ELL, and at-risk youth. The funding structure we have does not meet their needs. We have to adjust and create a more equitable system. And then the other issue is in my perfect world, it shouldn't matter where your zip code is as to what you have access to. And unfortunately, across the state, depending on where you live and depending on what's available, your zip code does impact that. And that's because of the funding structure we have right now. I think all of our high school students should have access to a career and tech opportunity, early college. I think our young students should, especially those that are special ed and ELL, should have the best services available so that they can make those gains. So, I mean, there's a lot of behind the scenes things that need to happen in the funding to ensure that it's equitable, fair, and adequate. But like I said, we could talk all day long about what that looks like in terms of dollars. And that's why we participate and are supportive of the work of Launch, because that's what we're doing, is we're dissecting that and seeing what does it need to look like in Michigan, thanks to the support and partnership with business and philanthropy as well.
And we know too, schools are struggling right now to get enough employees, from teachers to bus drivers and everyone in between. How is that going to impact the education that our kids have if we can't start filling that gap?
It's going to we are in crisis right now as far as our educator shortage. During the pandemic, we saw staff members that may have had medical issues that have walked away from the profession just because they didn't want to risk their lives to be an educator. But over time, we've started to see this shortage occur, and then the pandemic hit, and now it's grown even more. There are a lot of great things happening across the state. And in fact, MDE just kicked off their new Welcome Back Michigan Proud campaign, and we are very supportive of that, because there's things in place with certifications and qualifications that you have to have. But I can remember being a principal, and it was nothing for me to have 200 applicants for a second grade position. Now our districts are lucky if they have one qualified. It is remarkable how big of a crisis we have on our hands with education. And part of it, you mentioned it earlier, and I appreciate you saying that parents are starting to appreciate their teachers, appreciate their educators, because now they're kind of seeing it firsthand of how challenging it can be. But education has really taken a lot of hits over the past few years. And why would people want to enter the profession? I mean, the public has been very critical of educators. And so we're trying to build that back, and we're trying to show that this is a great profession to be in, and it's so rewarding. I mean, I knew since I was 10 I wanted to be a teacher, so I'm glad I made that choice for myself.
I have some friends that have been substitute teachers, prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic as well. Some of them are retired or maybe are deciding that their career isn't the right career. They may want to go into teaching. It's hard to stand in front of a classroom of a bunch of fifth graders because they are smarter than we are.
Yeah, for sure. And bless them for wanting to be a substitute. That's a whole nother area that we are having a tremendous shortage in. But, with programs like the Welcome Back Educators, the state and our association, we're all trying to find ways to make it easy for them to want to re-enter into the profession. Because again, 10, 15 years ago, they couldn't get a teaching position, so they had to pick another career path. Or unfortunately, we shipped so many of our quality educators out of state because they had to go somewhere else to find those jobs. So this is kind of our all hands on deck. We need to get our educators back in the classroom.
Because if we don't have teachers to fill the classrooms, that continues, the struggle to try to get our kids educated. And
Absolutely.
if we're looking at the gap, we do know that, in history of all industries, not just teaching, but when there is a shortage of qualified people, then there are people that make it through the cracks that maybe shouldn't be teachers. So is there concern in that arena as we go forward?
Well, we've said all along, and again, with all our stakeholder work that we do with MDE, is this is a premier profession. We're educating the citizens in our future as well. We're not going to lower our standards or lower our qualifications just to have a warm body in a classroom. That is not the goal here. The goal here is to find talented, qualified people that may be interested in coming back to the classroom, or again, for us, we're trying to campaign to encourage people to enter the profession, and that's going to start in middle school and high school. So we've kind of got to build our own pipeline and then try and get those that have already been through an education program. And then we've also reduced some of the barriers that might exist in regards to the student teaching experience and some of those other things to help expedite teachers wanting to get in the profession. But you're exactly right. We have to have educators in order to be successful for our students.
And fun educators that make, learning exciting for the kids as well, because they learn so differently today than, back when we were kids. I mean, just think about all of the students this year, the fifth grade math, the old math, carry the one versus the new math. How many kids had to learn how to carry the one because mom and dad were like, I have no clue what you're doing?
Yeah, I've seen enough of the memes on Common Core that I totally understand. And having been an educator and then being an administrator and going back and trying to help my own child, I was like, what's going on here? I need to do a little more investigating. So it is very challenging. And we're trying to create a new group of leaders coming through our systems so that they can be successful in the workplace that is ever evolving. And now with COVID, I mean, how many businesses have gone completely online? If you don't have those technical skills, you're not going to be successful. So yeah, we have to have education be more flexible and have the ability to be more agile.
And with that, when we're talking about the students, because we know that throughout the pandemic and over the past year, some students just got lost in the shuffle because it was hard to, do count days and things of that nature. Do you anticipate that we've lost some of our students throughout this pandemic, and maybe they're going to other schools or they're deciding now to go completely online?
Yeah, we have a really good system of tracking our students. And I will tell you, you've read the stories probably of district leaders and teachers physically knocking door to door to find students. But there is concern that some of our students will not come back. And, for us too, this pandemic has really heightened the need for us to continue our focus on social emotional learning. Part of why we lost students is maybe they didn't have the supports at home that they needed to get to school or to get online or have those resources. So we're going to have to continue to address this. And I know districts have plans in place of how do we count every kid and get them back in the classroom. But unfortunately, we did see a huge shift with our students. And it's alarming because we need to know where they're at so that we can make sure they're safe and, of course, that they're learning.
Do they still have truancy officers?
We sure do. And actually, you probably heard the governor is putting together a social justice commission, and that will be huge for us too, because we do have to track where our students are and make sure they're safe.
So throughout the pandemic, when we're talking about losing some of the students, because some parents decided to put their kids in Catholic schools or other schools, private schools that were open, and the concern there is even more of a divide between the haves and the have-nots because they could afford it, but other parents couldn't. So do you anticipate those kids are going to stay at those schools, or maybe they come back?
Each family's going to have to make that decision. I would imagine if a parent had a positive experience in one particular situation that they will probably keep their child there. We've already been disrupted so much. If they're doing well, keep them where they're at and keep moving forward. And to be honest, that's what we all want for all our kids, is we want them to be in an environment where they're successful. We saw across the state, one district's in full remote and one's in full in-person. Parents were moving their kids over to that district because they needed to go to work or whatever their case may be. So we may see a little bit of jumping back and forth, but I would anticipate it's not going to be as great as what some people might think.
Dr. Tina Kerr with us here on the MegaCast, Executive Director for the Michigan Association of Superintendents and Administrators. Before we say goodbye to you today, anything else that you want to share or touch on that maybe I didn't ask?
Well, it's just more of a plea to our communities and our families. Be patient. Our educators have worked extremely hard, but there's a lot of work to do. When you come back in September, if you don't see the change that you anticipated, be patient, because it takes a lot of planning to get ready to do a hybrid or do a full remote in person. Districts have a lot of planning ahead of them. So I fully expect this recovery time to be 3, 4, 5 years before we get to where we really want to be in the end. So thank you for the support. And I'm very grateful that we have such resilient leaders across the state.
I think they should take some of this COVID money, and all the educators and the members of the superintendents and teachers, you all need a vacation. I mean, hello, right? Go to Disney World.
Exactly. It's open.
They deserve it after
great.
this year. Well, we so appreciate your time as always, and of course all the work, because we know it hasn't been easy, and there's no break this summer for you and your team, but we appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for bringing awareness to our communities.